Hello everybody, my name is Karim and today we got 10 minutes to understand how the UseEffect React hooks works. So in this video we'll be building a form validation using this hooks to get the gist of it. So without further ado, let's just start coding right now. So first let's define what is the UseEffect hooks and for which case it is useful. This hooks is mainly used for some scenarios where we need to fetch data. The UseEffects accept two arguments. The first is a function and the second is an array of dependencies, which is not mandatory. As you can see on the bottom of the screen here, we have three ways to use these hooks. The first with no dependencies, which will end up by running the first param, which is the function on every render. The second with an empty array of dependencies, and that will make the function run once on the first render only. And the third way is where the UseEffect form will run the function on the first render, but also when every time one of the dependencies variable get updated. So for this first example, we're gonna create a new state. We'll name it number of book, and we're gonna name the function to edit the states set number of book, and we're gonna initialize it to 0. So now we're gonna create our UseEffect hook, and within its function, we're gonna call the set number of book. So we can update the number of book states by incrementing its value by 1 for each call. And then we're gonna cancel its new value. So we can see on our logs the new value every time. So back to our browser, we can see that in the console section, we are logging the number of books and its value is being incremented infinitely. And that because the code within the UseEffect function is executed on every UI render. So to understand how this works, let's look at this graph. The first time our application is rendered on the browser, the UseEffect is executed. The code within our UseEffect contains the set number of book and a console.log. So the set number of book will get executed, updating the value of our number of books to 2. Then the UI will render. And if you are asking why, this is just how the useState hook operates. Every time a set is updated, the UI get rendered automatically. So on the screen, we'll get the new value, which is 2, and the UseEffect hook will get executed again because the UI just got rendered. So we'll be calling again set number of book, the UI render another time, and our UseEffect will be called one more time. And this is how we end up with an infinite number of book incrementation. Now we'll try to slow down a little bit the execution of our code. For that, let's put a set timeout function with a timeout of 1 second. Let's copy paste our UseEffect code inside this set timeout function. And if we go back to check our browser console, we can notice that the logs are being printed with a timeout of 1 second now. Now let's add an empty dependency array to our UseEffect. This will run the code on the first render of our application. So before calling the set state for updating the number of book, we should wait till the end of the timeout. 1 second after the set book will get executed and the value will change from 1 to 2. The UI will render, but contrary to the previous sequence, the UI rendering will have no effect on the UseEffect, no pun intended. And there will be only one UseEffect execution. Now let's add the object book to the dependency array of our UseEffect. And this means that our UseEffect hooks will be executed on the first UI render and also every time we update our book object. So back to our graph, our number of book initial value is set to 1. Same as before, on the first render we will update the number of book value to 2, then the UI will re-render and that's it. But remember, our UseEffect dependency was set to the book object. So now, if the user try to change any of the book fields, let's say, for example, its title, the UseEffect hooks will be launched one more time, and our number of book state will be updated to 3. So for every book fields update, we will wait 1 sec, then we increment the number of book states. If we go check our console, at first we can see that the number of book was logged once. Then on every keystroke, the value get incremented and logged again. Let's make things more useful. For that, we need a function that we will be calling to validate our form field. This will check every field of our book and return true if the inputs are valid, If not, return false. We're gonna call it form is valid. We wanna make sure that every user input is more than 5 characters, except for the summary, for which we're gonna check for 10 or more characters. Let's remove the number of book and put a new set instead that will be holding the boolean value of our from validation. Let's use set from is valid as the set state function and initialize its value to false. That means that when the first web page is loaded, the form is valid state is false. So now let's remove the call to set number of book within the UseEffect function that we've done before and put our new set form is valid with the value returned from the validation form function, form is valid. And as you can see here, Visual Studio Code is not happy, and that because form is valid function is using the same name as the state we declared just before. So let's rename it to something like validate form, and let's report the change at the set state call. I'm going to cancel the value of our from validation state here, and also I will make the timeout shorter, so I will set to 250 milliseconds instead. Back to our browser, we can see that the log section with the validation message was executed twice. But why is that? Knowing that the UseEffect function ran once on the first rendering and again on every form modification. But as you can see here, we still didn't touch our form field. And this is because outside of the strict mode, React might run your hooks multiple times. So let's get rid of this mode within the index.tsx file. And also keep in mind that we are putting it aside just for explaining how the UseEffect states hooks works. When on your dev environment, it's highly recommended to keep this mode. Last, note that you will only run into this problem in development mode. With the production build of your application, strict mode will be disabled and the hooks will not explicitly run twice. So let's get back to our browser, and now you can see that we have only one log once the application is rendered. The value of the validation form say is false for now, and let's edit our form to make it true. We're gonna set the book title, the author, we're gonna change the URL for the image, a summary, and as you can see on every keystroke we have a log message from the UseEffect hook. Let's set back our timeout to 3 seconds and get to the same graph as before to explain what's happening behind the scene. The user will be very fast at first and will input A followed by the letter N within the author input. For now, the UseEffect will be holding 2 timeouts for approximately 3 seconds each. In the queue, we'll have A coming just before N. Both are waiting for the timeout to end so we can execute the set state hook. And every time the user will add a new letter, it will fit to the rear of the queue. A new timeout of 3 seconds will start with the set state execution once ended. But there is a small problem here. If our user is typing very quickly, we will end up with multiple calls to the set state at the same time, which is not that necessary. For example, here, when the user input A, then N almost instantly, we will wait 3 seconds, then the form will get validated twice. For this case, having one validation is good enough, which also less greedy on the resources. Back to the browser, we can simulate this behavior by typing A, then N quickly. And after exactly 3 seconds, the console will display 2 messages of the 2 validation forms calls happening instantly. To make things more efficient, we need to implement the UseEffect cleanup function. This function will run when our component wants to in-mount and also right before the execution of the next scheduled effect. First, we will add a new variable to keep the timeout for a later use. We will also change the 3 sec to 250 millisec to make the validation execution a little bit faster after every keystroke. And then we will add our cleanup function. It's a function that will clear our timeout that we started just before. Not the one set by the UseEffect call, but the one just before. So this cleanup function will get called on the next run of the UseEffect hook. Let's get back to the graph to explain this sequence clearly. Just as before, the user will be very quick and input A, then N almost instantly. The first execution of the UseEffect linked to the letter A will start the timeout. The cleanup function will not run because we have no previous execution of the UseEffect hooks. Then the N keystroke will run again our UseEffect function. This time the cleanup function will get called. This will clear the previous timeout started with A, which means that the validation on the letter A will never get executed. Then a new timeout is started linked to the letter N. In our queue, we'll have only one timeout delaying the execution of one form validation instead of two. If the user type another letter before the end of this timeout, the same thing will happen. The execution linked to the letter N will disappear, and a new one will fit to the rear of the queue. Let's try this on the browser now, for the same scenario as the one explained with the graph. So I will input A and N very quickly. The first timeout got removed instantly here. I will wait then 2 seconds, then I will input the letter T. This will clear the previous timeout and the new one starts spinning. 3 seconds after, the validation form will run and we'll get our message on the console confirming that. Same again, I will type the last letter to write Antoine, which will keep only one timeout linked to the last letter, so we can end up with one validation instead of many. And that's a great enhancement. But for a feeling of instant form validation, we'll go back to our code to reduce the timeout to 250 milliseconds. And now back to the screen, the user experience is just as perfect as it can be. Now we want to prevent the user from sending the form if it's not valid. So to make things safe, we'll be switching between a disabled and an enabled add book button. We'll need to add a property disabled with a negative value of our form is valid state. Save that and back to the browser so we can test this new behavior. At first, as you can see, our form is empty and the button is disabled, so that's perfect. But now let's set our image URL. Let's get a title and input a summary, then an author. And as you can notice, the form gets to the valid state and the submit button is enabled once all the fields are valid. If the author field is holding less than 6 characters, the button gets disabled again. So now our form is valid and our add book button is enabled, and we can finally add this new book to our bookshelf. So guys, that's it. I hope you understood the UseEffect hook very well. See you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.